Hi everyone, hope everyone is well. In this video I'm going to talk through the glider landing phase, which is one of the parts of a turn. Now I'm going to use this example just to illustrate the mechanics. Now in this game you organise your gliders, the turns that they arrive in the setup, and if you haven't watched it yet, excuse me, there is a separate video on how to set up your game and all the things you need to do before you start the first turn. And that is part of it. In this game, the gliders do not all land at the same time. They do not land on the same turn. They can be delayed, and they can even be lost. So please watch that video to check out how those mechanics work. But in the first turn, and every turn thereafter, until you've landed all your gliders, you need to run through the glider landing phase. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. So let's use this example. I'm going to just remove that turn track. Glider D on this map, and this is the River Orne map. Glider D has arrived. Glider D always arrives on turn number 1. It's the only glider on this map that will arrive 100% on its turn, and it should land in zone D. Glider D landing in zone D. However, in the accounts that I've read of this particular operation, some of the gliders didn't land exactly in the most optimal position. Some of them did, but some of them did not. So to model that, we have a couple of charts that we're going to run through. This particular table tells us all the gliders, what map they are for, and what their zone designation is. So like I said, on this map, glider D is zone D. Not surprisingly, glider E is for zone E and F is for F. So we know all that information. Then what we're going to do, we're going to run through this table, which is the landing target table. And this is basically a 2D roll to see if the glider can land at its pre-designation target. So for example, glider D should land in D, and we roll 2 dice, and if we get a 7 to 12, then we get it lands exactly where it should. So it lands on D. However, if we get a 4 to 6, so with 2 dice, let's say we get a 3 and a 1, it misses its zone, and it will then land in its alternative zone. And this is for this one, which is D. It lands in this zone here, which is D in brackets. So it would land there. If you were rolling for glider E, it would land there, for example, because there's an E with brackets, and glider F, it would land there in F with brackets. So there is a chance that the gliders will miss their ideal target zones, and they will land in a different zone depending on the glider. There is also a chance, if you're very unlucky, that the gliders can collide. What this means, they're not colliding in the air. As they land, they collide with another glider that's already landed. So let's suppose in the turn track we worked out that glider E will land on turn 2, and which is great, but unfortunately it collides, as it lands, it collides with glider D, because we got the result for 2 to 3 when we were rolling for glider E. So they can collide, and I'll explain what happens if that happens. But once you've worked out your landing target, then your glider has landed, and you can then progress to the next table, which is the landing success. So again, when I've read all the accounts from the glider pilots, etc., sometimes they landed roughly on target, and they had a good landing, and that's great. Unfortunately, not all of them did. So to model that, you roll on this dice here, on this chart here. Sorry. And again, it's just a 2D. It's a very straightforward chart. You either have a good landing or you have a bad landing. Now, if you on the previous chart, so let's say we land here. We got the D is always going to land in its. Let's use glider E for example. We roll to see if glider E landed on target. In our case, it does. and then we roll to see if it gets a good landing or a bad landing. If it gets a good landing, all is great. Okay, and we would put our airborne units on the glider, and off they go. Brilliant. However, if it's a bad landing, which can happen, it's more unusual. It's a 2 to 6 on 2 dice, so the odds are you'll get a good landing. However, there is a modifier. If you missed your target zone and you end up, for example, here, so if you miss your target zone, then you get a -1 modifier to this chart. So it's slightly more chance of getting a bad landing if you miss your target zone. This is because when you look at the maps of that area, there were trees, there were all manner of obstacles that gliders could hit. So you've landed in the less optimal position, and there's a chance you've hit something, and so there's a more chance of a bad landing if you miss your target. Now, if you get a bad target, if you get a bad landing, then you've got 2 units per glider, and then you're going to roll to see if they are disrupted as a result of that. And it's exactly the same as a combat roll. So you would roll 2 dice for each unit, doing one at a time. And let's say you get a 3 and a 1 for the first unit. You retain the highest number. That's the number you have to beat using that unit's morale value. So 2 dice, let's say we get a 5 and a 5. Great, we beat it. We're fine. Wonderful. If we'd failed, you would put a disrupted counter on top of that unit. So there is a chance that your units can get disrupted. There's no chance of them being taken out of the game at this point. You're just delaying. And this is to model the confusion sometimes that happened for the troops as they landed, if they landed badly. And there's plenty of first-hand accounts of that happening. So you can get a result where you get a disrupted counter, and then you're going to have to remove that disrupted counter in that turn, or try to remove it in that turn, etc. Now, the other thing I probably just should touch on as well is the PIAT. So, per glider, and let's just tidy up a little bit. We're on turn 1. We've got the 2 units. The glider's landed well, brilliant. Landed on target. Well, it lands on target automatically because it's the first turn, and it's glider D. But it doesn't matter which glider you're rolling for. It lands well, good landing, on target. Everything's going swimmingly well. But we need to roll to see what happens to our PIAT. You have a PIAT counter per glider, and they are incredibly useful for taking on enemy armor that appears. But a lot of them, from what I've read, a number of them were damaged or lost at the glider landing. So to model that, there's a very straightforward chart. You roll 2d6 and you see if the PIAT is damaged or if it's good. There is a modifier. If on the previous chart you got a bad landing, there's a -1 modifier to that result. But the odds are in your favour, 7 to 12. The PIAT is all good. And let's say we roll our 2 dice and we get an 11. PIAT's all fine. We can then put the PIAT on a particular unit or underneath the unit to your preference. And that represents that unit having a PIAT weapon, which will probably come in quite useful. However, if you get a 2 to 6, remembering that -1 modifier if you get a bad landing, then it's damaged or lost out of the game. You would remove it from the game. And unfortunately, those units don't have a PIAT. However, you've got 3 gliders. So again, the odds are that you should be able to make sure the odds are that you will have a PIAT. And the PIAT, if you watch the player phase, when I talk about combat, you'll understand that the PIAT, but basically it improves the odds when fighting against enemy vehicles. You don't need a PIAT to defeat an enemy vehicle. It just helps, because I've read accounts of the Airborne using other explosive weapons to knock out enemy vehicles, not just the Piat. Or that was the primary one. So that model's that. So I think that covers everything in the glider phase. As you can see, once you've landed all your gliders, so let's say they've all had a good landing and they've all landed on target, etc., and the troops have all got out and made their way to the bridges. Once you've landed all your gliders, you don't need to do that phase anymore. And the gliders will have all the landing turns, etc., would have all resolved by turn 5. I think it's the latest that they could possibly arrive. So after turn 5, you don't need to go through this phase. But just to recap, the key things are you've worked out your schedule in the setup. Every turn that they could land, you roll to see if they land on the target, and they do or they don't. And you roll to see if they have a good landing or not. If they don't have a good landing, then your units on the gliders make it disrupted, etc. And you may lose your Piat as a result of the landings. And the good landing, bad landing just increases the odds on that mechanic. So hopefully that gives you an overview. It's all detailed in the rulebook, of course, but that pretty much covers everything. I do have separate videos for all the other phases of the game, so please do check those out. And thanks a lot for the support for this game, and thanks a lot for watching, as always. Thank you.